Hi there and welcome. My name is Dustin Cooper and I'll be hosting today's show. And joining me right here is our three guests and local comic book artists. If you would introduce yourselves.
Sure. My name's Marty Owings.
I'm Jim Clark.
And I'm CJ Renner.
And you guys are locally from Minnesota and do local comic books. And today we're just going to talk about some of the work you guys have done. And maybe if you want to go each and let us know what exactly your role is in creating these.
Sure. Just a regular guy who has been kicking around a crazy idea for about 10 years to produce it and write and draw and illustrate a comic book, a graphic novel, but really something that might transcend comic book, the genre, and be a real, human interest story.
Sure.
So my role is really just to try to bring this concept to life, and so I needed to find people to help me. And so I've been following the work of Jim Clark, the artist here, and CJ Renner, the writer, and read their Colliders book. And I approached them at a local Comic-Con, and they were interested.
I illustrate comics lately. As Marty was saying, he came to CJ and I. We had already been working on a book, Colliders, for about 5 years, which CJ had come up with the concept, done the writing. I did all the illustrative work, the pencils, the inks, the lettering, colors when there were colors, etc. Marty was coming looking for some individuals to collaborate on his project. Marty's an artist himself, so he was looking to do a good part of that artwork. He'd done a great deal of world building, concept ideas, concept sketches. He had this whole world built in his mind, but looking to find some people with some experience to help birth it. So CJ took that story, and he'll talk about that process, or the nugget, and built a story around that nugget and scripted it out. And for my part, I did the pencils. The workflow on a comic book, traditionally, writer comes up with a script, passes it on to the artist. There's generally one artist, historically, that does the pencils, graphite work, etc. And traditionally, that work is then passed on to an inker. And that process, that workflow came about from, at the inception of comic book production. When they first started making comic books, there wasn't the reprographic printing process ability to reproduce pencils. They needed to be made darker. So pencilers, you do the pencil work, then you'd use India ink over the top of that to make it dark enough to make the plates to mass produce it. Well, they found out, the money people, pretty soon that, hey, we take a page out of old Henry Ford's book and make this an assembly line process. We get a big name person to do, and not that this is the situation here, and I'm just talking historically.
No,
you get a big name person, big name artist to do the penciling, and then we can pass it on to a lesser known artist, maybe getting paid a little bit less, and they're doing the inking, and that way we can really milk that penciler, and they can do a bunch of books, and then we can get somebody else to make the art darker. But that process, it gave birth to the inker as an artist, that subdivision, the identity of that work, it became something more than just making the art darker. Right. Inkers have personality. Inkers have a stamp. And for years and years and years, it has been where the penciler has a certain identity. They put the bones there, they do the layouts, and then passing it on to the inker clarifies things, maybe identifies light source when there isn't a light source identified by the penciler. Mm-hmm. And they assert a certain fingerprint on the work. Nowadays, we do have the technology to reproduce pencils. So in some books, in some processes, the inker is getting pushed out of that process a little bit because you can go pencils direct to color. And that is another, there's wonderful things about that aesthetically as well. Sure. But it is a shame to lose, to a certain degree, and this is not happening maybe on a mass scale, but to a certain degree, the inker as an artist in and of themselves. So for Freedom Raiders, Marty's project, I'm doing the pencils, Marty's doing the inks and the colors, and CJ did the writing.
What a segue, yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting and in a unique medium for a situation like this where, at a convention, Marty, we'd spoken with him a couple times about our book, and it's the kind of thing where you can go right up, chat with the people, get a feel for, could we work together on something? Can we,
Right.
A, does our work suit each other? B, do we have some of the same interests? And C, can we stand each other as people? And
Right.
it's and that remains to be seen yet, right?
For sure.
But it's a pretty collaboration-friendly situation. It's not like writing novels where you're sitting at home, all by yourself or whatever. And it's not even like movie making where, you can't just go to, your local Batman versus Superman showing and be like, oh, I want to be in on that, and be like, oh, I want to be in on the sequel. Let me, carry
Right.
coffee or something. Like it's, there's something more to that. But, this situation is the kind of thing where it's like, if you did comic books and if you want to be making comic books, especially in the Twin Cities, there is a community there that, you can interact with those people. And then, as Marty was saying, he's not only doing the inks and colors, but, he's the producer, project manager kind of role on this. And so we ended up, he had these nuggets, these visual nuggets, and then also story nuggets. And so there was a process of feeling out there where it was, how much, my entering into it as the writer, how much space do I have? And, there's a lot of logistical stuff that, as a writer, okay, how much space is this person going to give me? And,
Right.
and then on the flip side of that, how much structure do they have? And it can be, and I bumped into this before, it can be a situation where you end up spending more time appeasing this person's, rewrites and stuff than you spend actually doing the creative stuff. And so, it was an interesting process, and one that Jim and that was part of the incentive for taking on this project is, our first thing that we did was completely independent. We do what we want. We
Right.
go by our own deadlines and whatnot. But something like this is a step closer to the process of working for an imprint where, you have somebody that, is your boss and somebody that can say, hey, I don't like this, the narration in this panel, take it out,
Sure.
And so I was excited to be able to work in an environment where, the buck doesn't always stop with me, and writing wise or Jim visually or whatever. So, I think you would, I don't want to put you on or speak for you, whatever, but it actually ended up to be a very pleasant and civil and fertile creative ground, I think, to have another person in the mix with us.
No, absolutely. And if I'm not mistaken, is there not another person that's helping you on Freedom Raiders as well?
Yeah, Chuck McCann, he's the lettering guy, but he's in Florida,
Okay.
so he'll do all the lettering digitally for the book. And before we get into some of the background on the book, I just want to
Sure.
say, what you heard from CJ and Jim was really the public story we tell when we're on
Right.
TV, but the real story behind Freedom Raiders is far more interesting. I approached two desperate men with a pocket full of cash, and it wasn't very much, I'm not going to lie. And I flashed it. I had a lot of ones in the wad, and there was a 20 on the outside, and they saw that, and they go,
Suckered us in.
We'll take it, we'll take it. I just laid it on the table as a bundle. I just slapped it down and said, here, can you guys draw some stuff and write? And they were, actually, they took a while to make a decision on the book, that's the truth. But the fact of the matter is, I absolutely wanted to work with these guys. I'd seen their work before. I knew Jim as an artist long before I really, knew much about what he could do with comic books, because I'd seen him online and seen his work, and he teaches art as well. And CJ's work I had to gain an appreciation for through Colliders, because he had written that. But from the first meeting we had at like the convention to follow-up meetings at a coffee shop, and then our subsequent, exchanges through phone calls and emails, I think it became clear right away, and I think CJ hit on it, that we could work together pretty good, and I wasn't gonna put too much. I had this dream, and when you have a dream of something and you've worked on it for 10 years,
Right.
it's like it's your baby. You've cultivated it. Like Jim said, I had built this kind of complex universe in my mind, and frankly, CJ challenged some of that. He said, "Look, I don't know if this works or that works, but would you think about doing this?" And you have to be open to that. You have to
Right.
let some of that go. And if your baby's ever going to grow up, you kind of have to push it out the door. So I appreciated that. I thought that was a good part of the collaboration.
I was, frankly, a little bit surprised that you were, and there certainly wasn't like, there were times when I said, hey, maybe I think we should change this, and you're like, no, that stays. I really am married to that, and that's great, and I appreciate that, and we work with that, and that's great. But I was impressed that you were able to, like, because you grow with it, like you say, it's like your baby, you grow with it, but then at some point you need to step back and say, okay, this idea that I had back there, maybe in order to grow in this other way, we need to, divorce from that or whatever. So.
Oh, sure. Could you maybe talk about the process of creating the colliders?
I didn't create the colliders. That was really the birth, the child of CJ and Jim. I wasn't even connected with that project, other than being a huge fan,
Right.
and reading it and enjoying it. I have all the issues plus the graphic novel in triplicate, and I keep one of them in a safe box, because I think CJ and Jim signed it. I don't want anybody to touch that.
That's too nice.
It's pretty awesome.
Too nice.
It's pretty awesome, but it's up there with
sure.
it's a great book, and it's up there with I keep it with some of the ones I really like to reread and stuff. But I had nothing to do with the project.
No, sure.
I came along as a fan,
Right.
and that's how
Which
I
is-
found Jim and CJ. Really.
Well, if you guys wanted to elaborate maybe more on how that process was for you guys and how you were willing to take the next step on this next project.
Sure. I'm going to start talking about colliders. It seemed
Go for
logical
Go
that
for
you
it.
would.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. I don't like to talk. That's fine.
I grew up reading comics. I love comics. I drew comics as a kid, right? Junior high, I had my own hero, the Color Guard, and I drew these comics, and I sold subscriptions to my friends for 25 cents a week, and I just cranked this stuff out, nobody's business, right? But then I was seduced by action painting, non-representational, abstract expressionism, and I went to school. That was a major focus for me, was painting, and was painting in ways that were non-representational, because I love that work too. But it took a long time to realize that wasn't my wheelhouse. That wasn't where my skill set is most naturally. I still challenge myself by engaging in that activity once in a while, but I was born not maybe naturally a draftsperson, a draftsman, but that's where my tendencies are. But I am primarily an observational draftsman. I mean, I draw from life, and I have a great deal of experience and comfort with drawing from life. And I teach a class and have taught observational drawing for 10 years, and that's how I met CJ. He's
That's
a
how
student.
I met you.
That's how he met me.
Right.
And
Jim doesn't meet anybody.
Okay.
Everybody just meets Jim.
Yeah.
Let's be
Yeah.
honest.
Set the record straight.
Yeah.
He knew that I had read comics, and he had interest, and he'll speak, I think, on the work and the academic pursuit of. I mean, he's got a whole writing. I mean, he's written. If there is a written word format, this guy has engaged in
I've dabbled in it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so he knew that I had read comics, had an appreciation for comics, and drew. And he approached me about doing this Colliders project. And it wasn't like a thunderbolt, and I was like, oh yeah, I have to do this. You know, I could say that. It'd be easy for me to say that, but
Right.
but it was. I was full of apprehension about it because I know the divide between effective observational drawing, even that with inventive qualities about it, that quote unquote fine artists engage in, and that of sequential art storytelling, and illustrating, pulling images whole cloth and having them tell the story that the writer intends, given stage direction. I mean, it is a whole nother ball of wax. And
Right.
I have a great deal of respect, have as much or more now, for those with that ability. And it took me, and I'm still working on finding my voice in that. Because it's another beast entirely, and my initial work on Colliders, there's a tentativeness and a hesitancy that no one wants to see in any drawing, let alone in a sequential artwork. I'm not selling Colliders very well.
No. And, I mean, I'm going to jump in and Marty read a little bit here because, I mean, Jim is an amazing fine artist, and even he can't deny that, even though he pretends to be modest. But I mean, it's easy to look at fine art and comic books and be like, oh, there's a crossover here. Wow, like if somebody is a great painter, of course they're gonna really bring something great to, comic book illustration or whatever. But like Jim's saying, there's also a huge difference,
Right.
And we get at conventions, you get a lot of time, which I always enjoy. Folks will come up with their portfolio and say, hey, can you look at my drawing? Do you think maybe this could be a career for me, or what do you have some tips or whatever? And so often it's somebody who has some skill, goes to art school or is looking to go to art school or has already
Sure.
gone or whatever. But almost always, one of the big tips that we give to those people is you got to try drawing sequentially as a page. Just because you can draw a picture,
Right.
it's a very different skill or whatever. And Jim's a perfectionist, and which is great. You know, if you're the writer, it's great to have a perfectionist as the illustrator because you get a lot of free work out of it. But he went back when we assembled our 8 issues into a trade. He went back and essentially redrew an issue and a half worth of stuff that 90% of that I was like, it's great, it totally flies, whatever,
Right.
but yields himself to a higher standard than I hold him to or whatever. Anyway, and I did appreciate when I saw those new things and whatever, but it's one of those things that if you're a great novelist, let's say, and you're selling millions of copies, as soon as you're done with your book and you put it out there, of course you think and that you can write something better, and so there is always that fight of like, how much do we tweak until we put something out, and then how much do we just make that next thing better?
If we had not had the deadline of this book needs to be out now, I would still be tweaking.
Mm-hmm.
I was tweaking the last minute of the last day on, just about, if I had a laptop with sufficient power, I would have been doing it in the car, bringing that drive over. And it's absolutely true. I mean, you could keep tweaking and keep tweaking.
But that's the difference between working and hobbying or whatever is.
Right.
You gotta be putting that effort in, not just drawing when you feel like it or whatever. Yeah.
For sure, and I was, and still very sensitive to a certain dilettanteism that can be rampant in any of the arts, and that is one where you just kind of dip your toe in and you make a thing and you put a thing out, but the pursuit of if not excellence, a personal voice at least is of utmost concern, because there are so many people that have come before us that have respected the art form in that way, and many people that are fighting tooth and nail to make it, doing it right now, and to bring any less to the table, I mean,
Right.
it'd be pretty disgusting, really. That's does that sound like a bummer?
No, and I was just thinking. I mean, it's great to be on a team with people like that, because there are those times when you're like, oh man, it'd just be easier if this was just this should be a 3-panel page, but it'd just be easier to write it as one, whatever.
Right.
And when you respect the people that you're working with, you want to give them your best, and I think I've found actually that my writing, the amount of time it takes me to write a page, has actually increased the better writer that I've become. I would have thought, and I think it would seem natural that like you get faster and faster or
Right.
whatever. But I do think a big part of that is, as you understand your collaborators' work more, it becomes, with the first issues of Colliders or whatever, I'm just writing the story I want to say. I'm just telling the story I want to tell or whatever. But, as you get to know and have a familiarity with a specific artist, you start to put yourself in their shoes, and you're writing a panel and you're like, you know what, this person could really deliver, this look or whatever. And, it's another ball that you're juggling while you're writing or whatever. And frankly, it's like, it's another level to collaboration that is what makes it more fun than just prose writing or whatever.
No, definitely. And maybe if you guys want to talk about the transition to your current project and Marty's kind of dream, and the Freedom Raiders, and how this all came about, and what the characters are, and kind of break that down
give you
for
a
us.
little background of the universe, and these guys can jump in. But
Yeah.
really, this is it's a fictional universe set in an alternate history, an alternate American history. So the Civil War basically ended at a stalemate areas.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it's now 1910, so it's what, roughly 40, 50 years after the Civil War has ended, and society in America is very divided, and there's still,
Right.
you know, think of two separate nations divided, you know, with this scar that runs through it, you know. And basically the Freedom Raiders are a group of emancipators from the North who like to raid into the South to free and liberate people who are still in bondage.
Sure.
So basically, you know, a lot of this came from I grew up 100 years after the Civil War in the South. I grew up in Mississippi, and I was exposed to a lot of, you know, racial tension, and heard all the oral histories about the Civil War, and, you know, things of that nature. But the people, the characters, this story had for me to transcend a comic book.
Right.
You know, when you think of a comic book as an art form, it had to really stand on its own as a story. And I had all these ideas in my head about it, and, you know, it's like, you know, for 10 years I wrote this world. I kind of, you know, had these ideas, and I sat down with Jim and CJ once we decided to do the project, and it was like I had diarrhea of the brain. I mean, I just threw everything
Right,
at
it's
you
just great.
guys.
Yeah.
And it was all over the place, and it built a nice background, but it really didn't have any structure, and the story and the characters weren't developed. I mean, I had some rough idea of the main players, but
Okay.
really no structure to the character, right?
Sure.
And that's what makes a good story.
Right.
Well,
Whether
and
it's-
that's, I mean, it's kind of a treat in that, you know, you have these nuggets, and you had some prep drawings, and, you know, an idea for this is what their costumes look like, or this is, you know, one farm that they might visit or whatever. And so coming into that and knowing, okay, you know, these characters need to have, you know, an interpersonal conflict, you know, within this group, you know, who are these three guys, and how do they relate to each other? But then also, you know, how are they going to be changing across one issue, across a whole story arc, things like that. And it's like, you know, it becomes kind of a fun math problem or something like that. And then, you know, and then it kicks down to the next person in line where, you know, Jim's got to come up with, you know, what would this farm look like? What are these costumes? And I think for me, one of the most exciting things was, you know, it's not a superhero story,
Right.
but you've got these, you know, these emancipators, and there's a little bit of a steampunk style going on, and you know, a chance to play, you know, a chance for us to play, and so seeing their costumes for the first time was like, you know, it's like seeing, you know, the X-Men costumes for the first time or something. It's an exciting, like, you know, creative part of the process, and kind of a time where you can like shake each other's hands and be like, this is what the Freedom Raiders look like, you know.
But it wasn't, you know, a super rosy, 100%, you know, pat on the back experience in that, but a good one. This is, I think, a great example of the collaborative nature, but Marty as project manager, and essentially editor too, which is something that, you know, on Colliders and even on this Freedom Raiders project, on the big books, you know, Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Image, you know, there's an editor that's serving as that person that's got all this stuff going on, and they're making calls, right? They're making creative calls, and they're saying, you know, this can't be this way, and that's their job, and one can expect, well, I'm going to hear from the editor some things that they're going to rub me the wrong way, and, you know, that's what they do. But, you know, we're down kind of in the trenches together to a certain degree, but Marty's a say, and when CJ talks about the superhero aspect of it, and that it is a comic book, and this is, you know, this is kind of tongue-in-cheek too, but on the big reveal of the Freedom Raiders, I drew the pants too tight. They're a little bit too superheroic. I mean, a little bit too lycra, or superheroic.
Sure.
And so, and in fact, we've got images of the penciled page, so you could see the original pants, and but they were tight. And then Marty's inks, it was an opportunity to loosen those up, bring them more in line with his vision of this book being, well, it has truly superheroic aspects to it. His heart is, in the book, is really rooted in emotional reality. And he wanted to maybe I shouldn't speak for you, Marty, but I think
you're doing
it's to respect where that story was coming from. It had to have a bit more grit to it,
Right.
and less of the typical comic book aesthetic in tight-fitting pants.
It's a great point. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's not all roses for sure, and there's times when I write something and in any of the things that we've worked on. We were just talking yesterday about a panel that he thought would work better, from a different point of view or whatever, and
I was right, of course.
Right.
But,
I told him he was right, but that he couldn't do it. But no, it seems to me, you bump into a lot of disagreements and then assessing, how large how important is this one to me? Is this disagreement?
Right.
And it's just one of those things, you got to be adults and you got to work together. And if it were clear, I mean, it's easy to say, well, we're just going to do what's best for the book, but we all have slightly different opinions about that.
For sure. One thing I want to mention, as long as you kind of brought up differences, is that not for 1 second, not for one moment, did I lose sight of the fact that this is 3 white guys in Minnesota writing about these black guys that are going into the South fighting against, slavery and oppression. Right. And I had a good friend of mine, his name is Rasheem Harris. He's a consultant on the book. He's an African-American guy, and I had to go to him for language and a little dialogue coaching, and how would this seem to you, from a cultural standpoint. But it's really difficult to do because you have to put these characters not only back in 1910, but in an alternate history of 1910, right, where the Civil War wasn't won. It ended up a stalemate. So what would that look like? What would that place, that world, be like for people who are African American, who are, when the country is still half slave and half free? And so just trying to be sensitive to the fact that, we're working on this book. What can we do? I don't want to make these characters cartoonish. They can't be. Right. They're not. They can't fit the stereotype because they're not. They're extraordinary characters. I mean, imagine the courage it would take you to do what they're doing.
Exactly.
And I didn't want to make this like a buddy cop sort of comic where you got one black guy and a white guy who do stuff, but they do end up running into a guy in the story who's kind of basically he's lost his way, and he's given up on life, and he has no purpose other than to basically wander off into the desert and die.
Right.
And they stumble upon him, and he sees the courage and the what do you call it, the humanity in these guys, and he decides maybe there is something to live for. So these are people that can teach other people, characters who transcend the stereotypical, white guy writing the African American experience.
It kind of bumps up against what I would say is the most difficult part of this particular project thus far, and that's that, or for me, sorry, the most difficult part of the project for me is that you want to create this, single issue, 24-page comic, and you want it to satisfy a story arc where, there's conflict and there's resolution and whatever, but you also want to leave, strong threads to be pulled later. So it has to be, kind of an embryonic exemplar, as you would say, of, a larger thing. But it also tied with that is because, race is such a big part of it, you want to show the readers that, you respect and understand the nuances of race, that this story, while it's set, alternate history 100 years ago, is also relevant today. There are pages where, when you're sitting down and writing, you're writing the perspective of a character who, is not a good person. And you have to be able to convey that in a way where the reader reads it and doesn't think, well, wait, that's what these people think who, are making this thing. So you have to there's a lot of non-story things that, you have to show the reader that you have mastery of and have considered throughout the whole thing. And for me, that was a new thing with the Colliders thing. It was a sci-fi thing. You just jump around, time and space as you want, and
Sure.
It's maybe less honed and more explorational or whatever. But it was a great, for me, I appreciated having to go through that, trying to, and Marty had to, in reading the script a few times, say like, you know what, I don't think the character would say it quite like that here or quite like that there.
Yeah, I mean, the litmus test for me, for CJ's writing, is would it stand on its own without the pictures? Could I read through it and understand what was going on? And he achieved that in pretty short order, given the time frame we had to work in. And so I felt immediately good about the beginnings of the story. But then, when you're going to bring it to life, now imagine this: you got these characters you're invested in. You know who they are, because I just spent the last 9 or 10 years with these guys.
Sure.
I mean, I lived a lot of my life with them. I know who they are and what they're capable of, or at least I had imagined I did. And so, and I needed that to be brought to life. So not only with CJ's words, but if you look, like, I'll just point out, like, this is one of my favorite panels that Jim drew, just because the subtleties to it and the angles and just the story it almost tells without words. And so for both of these guys, my measure is, one, could I understand part of the story looking at Jim's art? And if I had no art from Jim, could I understand and feel the power of the story through CJ's writing? And when the answer to both of those is yes, then I think you've created something that's
Great balance.
Yeah, and it transcends sort of, the comic book you're going to pick up that some guy worked on for 3 weeks.
Right.
I mean, these things have been rolling around inside your soul for a long time. And when I saw this come to life to Jim, I knew that a little bit of whatever I had in my vision, I mean, he felt it right here, I mean,
Right.
I could just tell, and not only that, but his craftsmanship is awesome. So that's a singular achievement in my mind. And whether it goes anywhere or anybody cares about it or reads it, for me, it's like a work of art. It's like something we've accomplished together. We're not done yet, but when it is done, I'll be able to rest a little bit easier.
Well, maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on like how the story opens and how you kind of brought it back to Minnesota.
Well, a little bit. I mean, it starts out
Right.
with, there's a key battle on Cemetery Hill during the Battle of Gettysburg, where the 1st Minnesota Regiment was involved. And everybody knows if they're a Minnesota, and I'm a history major, there's an English major, and here's an art guy, right? So
I like to look at pictures.
Yeah, he likes to look at pictures. But here's the thing, if you know anything about Minnesota's history in the Civil War, the 1st Minnesota played a pivotal role. So on Cemetery Hill, they need to hold off. I mean, I think it was, thousands and thousands of Confederate troops that wanted to take Cemetery Hill. Well, anyway, it opens that way. with the Civil War. So it's a
Right.
step back in time, and from this current period, which is 1910. So it opens up with the battle.
And
of
it's kind
Cemetery
of
Hill.
it's the moment that, at least as I see it, the moment that the history of this book deviates from the history of the real world, where in the real world, the Minnesota first was sent in, and essentially with no chance of success, right? And they were just sent in as merely to hold the Confederates off
To
for
buy time,
20
yeah.
minutes,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it was a death sentence, and they did it bravely, and people say that it is what ended up being the pivotal point in the war. Well, in this book, page 1, we start with the captain looking out at the field and deciding, I can't sacrifice these people for this. That's I can't just send these people to death, which is a very understandable position.
Right, right.
And that act of mercy kind of creates this alternate history, which is in a lot of ways a worse history. But he didn't know that at the time in the book, or whatever.
And that captures the essence, right, of life. I mean, it isn't in the big decisions we make oftentimes. It's in those moments that we don't know what our decision, what kind of lasting impact it's going to have. We don't have the opportunity to change the time arc in our own lives, so we don't know exactly. But but in comic book, as in movies or novels, we have that opportunity to look at it from a different angle. And so, exactly, right? So Winfield Scott says, send them in, and the history is what it is now for us in
Right.
America. We're all one nation, and everybody's free. But that's not the history that happens here. And the Freedom Raiders, it gives birth eventually to the Freedom Raiders movement, which borrows from the Freedom Riders. And if you know any history about the 1960s civil rights movement, the Freedom Riders were people who got on buses and went down south
Right.
and helped people get out the vote and try to overcome sort of the that oppression. So
Maybe you could tell me a little bit more about our 3 main protagonists in the story a little bit.
yeah, well, I could tell you for hours about them. But I think I'm going to defer to CJ because he really helped develop these characters and bring them to life.
Well, we want to kind of, you want these to be round characters, but you also want them to be characters that you feel, in the first panel or two, like who this person is,
Right.
but then you're surprised later in the issue or in subsequent issues by where did they come from or
You
decisions
can't
that
judge a
they're
book by its
making.
cover.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly. And so these 3 guys, they're kind of infamous for having they're legendary. They're in a small sense right now because they're just starting, but people have started to hear in the South that these 3 guys go around and emancipate people and whatever, and they kind of they're starting to embrace that and realize that there's a power in this this myth of these 3 guys, but at the same time, they're also a little bit, they know they can't quite live up to that superhero status, and so they're trying to pretend to be this great thing, and hopefully in doing that, they can be that great thing. And there's one's a little more ready to go heel at any moment, and has to be held back by the
He's
other
angry.
guys. And
Yeah,
and
he's
exactly,
angry.
he's angry, and there's tension between them about what ends are justified by what or what
Right.
means are justified by what ends, and things like that. But there's also this thread of they're on the same team, and so they have to part of their identity is showing the people around them, even though they're in the South, which is a different South than our history or whatever, that they are worthy of being considered great people and equal people and whatever. And so how do you navigate that by you're being they're committing crimes exactly,
Right.
they're
That's absolutely against the law.
Right, right.
Emancipate slaves,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
but they still have to be moral or whatever, and so there's a tension there.
Great. And how many issues are you guys looking to have this, or do you have a deadline when you want to have this wrapped up?
Well, the deadline for wrapping up this particular book is going to be probably by fall.
Okay.
So FallCon, it would be ready.
Right.
We'd release it around then. But as far as future issues, I think we'll see how the first one does, and then we'll go from there. But it's a story. I think people will be interested in more of it. I hope they will.
Right.
I mean, it's a pretty unique universe, and the moral dilemmas and the struggles that CJ mentioned, and the way that it's brought to life by Jim's work here, it's hard for me because I can sit here after it'll be 11 years since I kind of came up with this idea, and for me, it's like looking at it. I'm just an average guy from St. Paul, and this is, to me, it seems extraordinary. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, it does for me because I got like average talent. I look at Jim and CJ and their writing, but for me, I think people will enjoy it, and it's different. It's not like other books out there. It's differentiated in so far as it really. I think it paints an interesting history and sets up a universe in which a lot of different things could happen potentially. So,
I agree, and I mean, this is another thing that I think is interesting about the grouping of the three of us is that, when Jim and I have been doing our Colliders thing, we spend a lot of time with the making of it, and we love to go to the conventions and we love to go to the stores and I love to get people to read it, but we're maybe a little bit less business minded, we don't advertise it as much as we should, that kind of a thing.
Sure.
And when it comes time to are we gonna try and get people to blog about it, or are we gonna work on the next issue? We always kind of work on the next issue, and there's something good about that, but. Having Marty coming in, who's more business-minded and more, project goal aware or something like that, and we try to stay aware of that stuff when we do our stuff too. But I'm very curious in a entrepreneurial sense or whatever, when this book is done, when it's out, how that's going to affect, when we bring it out to stores or whatever, how it's going to affect the life of it after release. So,
and one thing that maybe I shouldn't say got lost in that. I mean, those were great explanations. But this issue does have a self-contained story with a beginning, a middle, and the end. So it doesn't end on a cliffhanger. A person purchasing the book need not be concerned that they're investing time in a thing that may not get resolution. But it does set up, much like the first Star Wars film did. That had a beginning, middle, and an end, but it allowed for a continued narrative on both sides, chronologically.
Sure.
And this definitely has that. I mean, Marty's spoken of all that he's put into this world. There are many, many stories that could happen in this universe, but this issue could stand on its own. Hopefully, it won't. Hopefully, the narrative will continue.
Right.
Yeah, look, and I'll put it to you plain. My expectations were to create a graphic novel to tell this story and to build these characters, to have these relationships, and have people identify with them. If that's all that happens, if we release the book and people enjoy reading it, or they pick it up 20 years from now and go, geez, I like this, you know what, I'll be happy. Maybe my expectations are too low, but for me, I really enjoyed the process, and trying to, Jim and I were talking before the show. We've each had some tragedy in our own lives with parents who have gotten sick or passed away, and I know CJ's probably dealt with this before himself, but you know, Jim said something to me really interesting. It struck me when I was standing there, but you know, Jim tries to live in the present, you know, and I think I try to do that more and more as I get older. I don't know about you, CJ, but yeah, if you're not living in the present and you just can't enjoy the process for what it is, look, I just take it down one more level. If all I ever got out of this was being friends with Jim and CJ, that's its own reward. Right. So at the end of the day, I think I feel good about everything that's happened. Now, these guys I think there's probably something in the back of their mind going, I wish this SOB would finish the inks and the coloring so we could get the book out there. But I'll get to it, and I you know, fall's our target. But to be honest, I mean, I really enjoyed the journey that we've taken together.
As did we.
Cool.
For sure, for sure. And you know, and we, the three of us, intentionally, you know, crafted this project so that it was going to be rewarding for all of us, I think. You know, and
that's what it felt like.
And and I'm glad that we put a little extra effort into the front end of like figuring out the logistics of it and whatever. To, you know, I mean, I don't think there's been any point in it where we you know, anybody's been sorry that they're a part of it or anything like that. So
for sure,
which is great, because I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of projects out there where people get halfway through and have
just
to burn
get a
it
little
down.
burnt out. Yeah.
right.
I think it's a fantastic story that you guys are trying to tell, and the type of characters and how it is, you know, very relatable and impactful today, especially, you know, on many topics that come up. And what's great too is it's such a fresh idea. That's why I love looking at local or smaller kind of comic books, is you get the very different, the very interesting perspectives, the drawings and concepts, and I think you guys have something really special here, and
Thank you.
I
That's great
really
to
can't
hear.
wait to take a look at it when it comes out.
That's very kind.
And I will be there at FallCon to check it out. But is there anything else you guys wanted to plug or say that you might be working on, or any places that people can see you or get some of your work?
I'll let these guys go first. Yeah.
Well, we have, so we mentioned a couple times that Collider's book, and we assembled that into a trade maybe about 6 months ago, and that's at most of the local comic shops, and we're at all the local, or most of the local conventions. There's a bunch of them new ones popping up, which is great.
The very next opportunity, convention-wise, is MSP Comic-Con, which is at the Minnesota State Fairgrounds.
And it's a blast. I mean, people dress up. You don't have to, but it's fun taking pictures with, you know, Darth Vader and, you know, whatever. And we always have a table at those. And
For sure. That's in May, and more information can be found by Googling MCBA Comic-Con, Minnesota Comic Book Association, or Midwest Comic Book Association.
And I've been to the big Comic-Con, you know, out in San Diego, and, you know, pound for pound, this one is more about comic books, the costumes are better.
Right.
So it's great, and it's like
And the
$10
artists,
or something.
creators
It's
are
great.
there?
Yeah.
For sure, many local artist creators, as well as big national and international names as well. So it's a
And
fantastic
dealers,
opportunity.
you know, if you want to go
the dealers,
find your,
absolutely.
you know, complete your comic
Complete
collection.
your comic collection.
Yeah.
Bring your spreadsheet printout with your missing issues.
I always do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, you know, for me, one of my singular goals in life is to actually get into the State Fair Fine Arts exhibit, which Jim, I think, operates, helps to run that show. There's no quid pro quo, because I try, but he won't take my bribes. But I keep trying to enter artwork in that every year. I think I've entered it for a long time, and so I continue to work on that, and it might be one of the pieces from this. I don't know if they let collaborative pieces in, but in all honesty, you know, Jim mentioned it earlier. Like, I feel in some ways we're lucky and blessed to have this genre. Although we went kind of old school. I mean, none of this is going to be digital except for some of the cleanup work and the lettering.
Sure.
Otherwise, the whole thing will be hand rendered.
Yeah, it's hand watercolored, which is, I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
like a
pretty rare.
labor of love, right?
Yeah.
Plus, it takes a long time, but that's part of the process. But I just wanted to say, you know, Jim had mentioned this earlier about kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, you know, and feeling a little bit overwhelmed sometimes by the notion that, there's this expectation that you might
Right.
have to live up to. So
Uh-huh.
I always remember, if you ever start thinking that, we've got such a cool idea or things might work great, I'm always immediately humbled by the people that I meet. And, it's like going to that fine art exhibit. You think you got a winner in a painting and you submit it, and then you go there and you realize how much talent there is in this state.
Absolutely.
And that's just the people you turn down.
For sure.
Not just the people who get in, but it's a humbling experience. And being in comic books is,
Right.
although I'm on the periphery of it, it's very humbling. I'm just feel very good to be working with these guys, and it's an honor.
I mean, as a fiction writer, you never get to, you can do a reading or something like that, but it's not like comic books where people come up and they buy the next issue right from you and say, oh
Right.
man, issue 6, I can't believe that person died. What?
Right.
And like
Exactly.
and that kind of interaction and direct feedback and whatever is helps keep the industry really vital. And Minneapolis, St. Paul is kind of a hotbed for it, because of these a couple of these local great shops and the local convention and whatnot. And so it's a pretty fun. I always encourage people like try it. Bring the kids down to the comic book
Right.
convention. It's pretty
Yeah.
fun. Yeah.
And as it comes up, we'd be remiss if we didn't also plug, we're working on a new book, Henri Louis. So it is set in the West, not the same West, but this is the South. It's set in the West. For updates on that, come see us at MSP Comic Con.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Marty, Jim,
Thank
CJ,
you.
for coming and showing us and giving us a sneak peek at this wonderful
Sure.
book that's going to be coming out. And yeah.
Yeah, no, we're happy to do it. And like I said, if you're not familiar with Jim and CJ's work, please get familiar with it, because it's pretty extraordinary. And that's why I chose these guys to do my book with. But Jim's, like you said, a fantastic artist. Go check out his website. CJ, you can read his musings in various
Anywhere.
yeah, basically all over. Some buildings.
Yeah, right.
We work together that way. But thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
I really
and-
appreciate it.
Well, and we really need to thank Mary.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Mary LaHaye, for having us on the program.
Absolutely.
She spoke
treasure.
very highly of you
A
guys,
treasure.
and I was very eager to meet you guys. And see
Well,
your
and
work.
thank you, Dustin.
Yes.
No doubt about it.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
I hope to have you guys on again sometime soon. Maybe
Sounds great.
work in the future or
Maybe
something.
when the Freedom Raiders
Yeah.
comes out.
Yeah,
There we go.
Absolutely.
We'll bring you an issue.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'd love it.
All right.
Well, thanks so much, everyone. Again, we're here with CJ, Marty, and Jim on their comic. Everybody can pick that up or see that later in the Fall Con when that comes up. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.